I grew up in a small town between Boston and Cape Cod in Massachusetts called Carver, and we were the self-proclaimed cranberry capital of the world. And what that meant is we had just endless miles of cranberry bogs and dirt roads and trails and woods, and it was this really amazing, adventurous place to be a kid. But what I really liked most about growing up there was the friends that I made. I knew most of the kids in my neighborhood since before I could even remember, and it always seemed like we were always just there. And when you grow up at an early age with a group of kids like that, you get to know each other intimately, and there's just a certain comfort in when you're together, and it's just easy and natural, and I always felt most at home when we were together. But as I started to get a little older, the things that I used to find so adventurous started to seem a little bit boring, and I just didn't know where I was going to end up in my life, but I didn't see myself living in Carver long term. But at the same time, I was really afraid to leave because I didn't want to leave the comfort and security of those friendships. But when I was around 25, I came to the terms with the fact that outside of those relationships, I didn't have a lot going on in my life, so I packed what little I had up into my car and I moved out to LA. And when I got here, you can imagine that it's completely different from the town that I grew up in. First of all, there are 0 cranberry bogs in Los Angeles. And there's just endless miles of concrete. I couldn't even imagine how much concrete there was when I got out here. And there's the traffic and the hordes and hordes of people. And I was really overwhelmed when I first got out here. And the funny thing is despite being surrounded by all those people, I had a really hard time meeting people and making new friends. You know, it turns out I'm a bit of an introvert, and I'm kind of socially awkward around people that I didn't know, and I didn't know those things about myself until I moved across the country to a really populated city full of strangers. And I wasn't good at making friends on my own. I hadn't had to make a friend independently since I was a little kid, when all you had to do was like walk up to somebody and say, hey, do you want to be friends? And you can't really do that as a grown person. and you know, but I didn't want to leave. You know, I was really lonely when I first got out here, and I constantly thought of moving back home, but I didn't want to leave because I finally started making good money as a freelancer. And I had all this time off in between jobs, and it's like 75 degrees here in January, and I did not want to go back to Boston blizzard, so I figured I got to make some fucking friends somehow, and I decided I was going to become a regular at a bar. There was this bar down the street from my house, and it had a pool table, and I liked playing pool, and I figured that was a good way for me to force myself to interact with other people and have conversations. And it was around this time that I met my friend Josie, and she also liked playing pool, so we started talking a lot. And when I first met her, I liked her right away, and right away she told me that her dad had just been admitted to the hospital, and she didn't know if he was going to make it out. And she spent every day at his bedside, and she would come to the bar at night to try and unwind and just feel normal. And you know, as the months went on, this is how it continued. She'd be at the hospital the day and the bar at night, and we'd talk. And eventually, I started sitting at her table with her friends. And eventually, it was Christmas time. And on Christmas morning, my phone rang, and it was Josie's best friend, Kim, and she told me that Josie's father had just died. And Kim was in Florida visiting her mother and wasn't going to be back to LA, and LA at Christmas time is a ghost town, so none of her friends were around, and she asked if I could go over and check on Josie to see if she was okay. So when I got over there, I was the first one to speak with Josie in person since her dad had died, and she already looked exhausted. It had just been a couple hours, and her family was already in the process of making plans to converge on her house to come to the memorial service that she was going to have to put together, and she just seemed so overwhelmed, and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but I didn't know really what to do, so I just said, look, I'm just going to be here. You know, when everybody gets here, if you need to step away, just come find me, and you can talk about whatever you want, and if you just don't want to talk, we can just sit there and not talk, but I'm just going to be here, you know, every day for as long as you need me not to be here. And so the week went by, and you know, people started showing up at her house, and she planned this really touching memorial. And it sounds weird to say, but I had a really good time that week, and because it was more of a, you know, like what an amazing life this guy led type of vibe than a sad funeral vibe. And you know, during that week, I heard all these great stories about Josie and her family and her childhood and about her dad, and I met all these great people, and I was just really thankful to be a part of that. And during that time, you know, she would find me, and sometimes we would talk, but most of the times we would just sit silently because she needed a break. And at the end of that, I realized that, you know, I was capable of making these connections with people if I just gave them a chance, because I felt as close to her as I had felt to anybody that I ever met. And, I knew that I was capable of making friends. And I had hoped that nobody else would have to die for me to make another friend. But I knew that I could. And that was 13 years ago. And I can't overstate the impact that this woman has had on my life. She introduced me to my wife. And I was there when she met her husband. And since that time, we spent every Christmas together. And this last Christmas, my wife Valerie and I were hosting dinner at our house. And, I took a moment to look around at this house full of people that I was fortunate to have met, and I'm lucky enough to call my friends. And I saw my 3-year-old daughter playing with Josie's kids, and I couldn't help but think about how just comfortable and natural and easy it all felt. And, I know that these aren't the people that I grew up with, but when I'm with them, I know I found my home. Thank you.